From January 1975 through May 31st, 2009, there have been a total of 213,814 crossing accidents, which were reported by the railroads to the National Response Center. Closer examination reveals that over 20,000 people were killed in these accidents, and another 79,469 people were injured. Shocking statistics were recently reported by the Federal Railroad Administration regarding railroad-related accidents and injuries. It is estimated that cars and trains collide every 12 minutes, with a total of 9,570 train incidents and accidents in the year 2009. Here are some disturbing statistics. Of the 9,570 train wrecks, 649 people were killed and 6,686 people were injured. The average train weighs 12 million pounds, so the weight ratio of a train to a car is about 4,000 to 1. This compares to the weight ratio of a car to an aluminum can. A train traveling at 50 miles per hour, pulling 100 cars, takes 1 mile to stop. So in a contest between a car and a train, the train obviously and always wins. The motorist in a train motor vehicle collision is 40 times more likely to die than in a collision between two motor vehicles. This fact is a real shocker. As of December 2009, the United States had 136,041 public at-grade railroad crossings. Of these crossings, approximately 42,301 have gates, 22,039 have flashing lights, and 1,196 have highway traffic signals, wigwags, and bells. So do the math. The remaining railroad crossings, approximately 72,000 in America today, over 50% have nothing. No warning lights, no gates, and nothing to protect drivers. Plus, to make matters even worse, not only are these 72,000 crossings unprotected, many of them are overgrown with weeds, trees, and other types of vegetation, and or have broken signals or gates that the railroad has failed to repair that make these crossings so very dangerous. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in a two-part TV exclusive, Death on the Tracks, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, $24 million cover-up Part 1, to show how Robert Potroff, partner at the Potroff Law Offices, and a team of some of America's best lawyers, Sharon Van Dyke at Van Dyke Law Firm, Paul Godlewski at Schwabel, Getz, Sieben, and Alan Shapiro at Finn Shapiro, successfully uncovered an illegal, unethical, and sinister corporate policy at Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad that put company profits before public safety. At approximately 10 p.m. on September 26, 2003, a Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway Company freight train traveling west at over 60 miles per hour slammed into a car at Ferry Street just north of Highway 10 in Anoka, Minnesota, and annihilated 4 young people, Brian Fraser, Bridget Shannon, Corey Chase, and Harry Rhodes. The car, a Chevy Cavalier, was literally torn apart and its parts were shredded into tiny little pieces. The vehicle and the 4 young people it carried were scattered hundreds of feet from the point of impact. Burlington Northern's immediate response as to the cause of the tragedy was to point the finger at the driver who they say ignored a warning signal and tried to beat the crossing gate. But a jury absolutely and positively disagreed with them. This is an unbelievable story of disgrace and shame, where a major Fortune 500 company, namely Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway Company, that didn't give a damn about the law, thought it was above the law, and broke the law time and time again to cover up its own deadly mistakes. It's a story where there was such a staggering pattern of misconduct aimed at covering up Burlington Northern's role in the deaths of these 4 people that it will totally shock you. Burlington Northern knew no bounds in breaking the law and thumbing their noses at the United States judicial system. And they played dirty, real dirty. Some of the unbelievable and illegal tactics they pulled will surprise even the most hardened criminals. Burlington Northern refused to produce the locomotive for an inspection by the state reconstruction team. They withheld data from locomotive event recorders from the police, as well as from the event recorders in the crossing. They attacked Bob Potroff and his team of lawyers in an attempt to prevent disclosure of the truth about the accident. And get this, Burlington Northern's own locomotive event recorder data completely discredited their engineer's story. They destroyed the voice recordings by the Signal Department's personnel after the accident. They covered up the work records that showed maintenance problems by filtering the relevant information out of the records produced. They falsified a phony document of the purported data from the signal system that allegedly proved the lights and gates were working properly at the time of the accident. They destroyed the computer that was used to download the signal system data. They lied to the court about the non-existence of any electronic files from which the paper copy of the purported data was printed. They lied to the court about electronic files discovered at the court-ordered inspection. They perjured themselves about the existence of electronic files stored on the railroad's mainframe computer. Their managers intimidated railroad witnesses. Bob and his lawyers also unraveled an elaborate scheme by the railroad to wrongfully target one of the kids as the driver so that it could launch a character assassination, point to his poor driving record, blame him for the accident, and deny his child any recovery. They pretended to settle the case with the 4 victims' families and then refused to pay after the settlement, claiming that new witnesses had been found to help their own case. Only problem was, the Burlington Northern's new witnesses had been bribed by the company. That's right, bribed. They paid them $5,000 and $10,000 each and provided them with their version of the facts needed to help their own case. The jury didn't want to hear any more of this egregious and unethical conduct and awarded a damage verdict of $24 million. But the biggest, most glaring illegal tactic that Burlington Northern engaged in was the missing electronic evidence. Railway crossing gates and lights are controlled and recorded by a box, the equivalent of a black box in an airplane. Burlington refused to give a copy of this electronic downloads to the police at the time of the investigation. Washington County Judge Ellen Moss had heard and watched enough, and the court, after finding the railroad guilty of destroying and fabricating evidence to support its own case, ordered sanctions, fees, and costs of $4.5 million for the railroad's staggering pattern of misconduct. Bob Potroff and his team of lawyers have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best train accident lawyers in the country, fighting for victims of railroad companies in the battle for railroad safety. And because of that, they are driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. Their goals, not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure that all railroad companies implement the maximum safety protections that all Americans need and deserve, and obey and follow the law. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Minneapolis, Minnesota, with the Potroff Law Offices. It is my great pleasure to introduce Bob Potroff to the show. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and the kinds of cases that you generally handle.
I'm in Manhattan, Kansas, where I started practice as a general practitioner, but over the last several decades I've developed an almost exclusive practice on railroad litigation, where I'm representing members of the public who have been affected in one way or another by railroad crossing accidents, pedestrian accidents, passengers, anybody who's a member of the public that has had a negative experience with the railroad.
Today we are going to be discussing one of your big cases. It's Chase versus Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. And one of your co-counsels on this case, Sharon Van Dyke, is with us. I'm going to bring her on the program right now so we can talk a little bit about the case and some of the legal challenges and hurdles you face. So let's do that right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sharon Van Dyke. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you.
You work very closely with Bob on this case, Chase versus Burlington Northern, right?
Yes, I did.
Let's talk about what happened, this case, on September 26, 2003.
Well, it's a tragedy that we have a bunch of kids right after high school football games. They're going to get together and they're actually going to see some friends off because we've got a young man that's going to go serve his country overseas and be deployed to Iraq. So as they are on their way to this gathering, they're approaching the Ferry Street crossing, nothing out of the ordinary, and with about a 1-second warning, a train coming at 60 miles an hour T-bones the car with these 4 young kids in it, killing them all, tearing the car in half, and leaving 300 or 400 feet of a debris field as the only evidence as to what happened.
Yeah. Now, the immediate response from the railroad was it was the kids' fault, correct?
No question. The public relations machine of the railroad immediately put out the misinformation that this car had gone around the gates and they were trying to beat the train, and unfortunately they got hit by a locomotive that couldn't stop.
Now, when you say the public relations machine, they notify the newspapers, right? They have a public relations firm, and they want it embedded in the public's mind that it was these kids, these reckless kids, who basically killed themselves, right?
That's exactly what they did. And in fact, on the first night after the accident on the news, the closing shot on the news was a pristine alcohol bottle on top of the wrecked car.
Yeah.
But it didn't belong in the car.
Despite the fact that there's no alcohol in the systems of any of these kids.
Yeah. This is irresponsible journalism, wasn't it?
That's what I would call it.
What happened after that? Go ahead.
When the aftermath of this accident is investigated, thank goodness for cameras. The only thing you could be certain of is that the cameras weren't lying. And of all the photographs taken by all the different agencies, there became this one skid mark that made it painfully obvious to me that this car could not have gone around the gate and been in the position where the skid mark was at the time of impact. One step at a time, we went back and gathered evidence out of the photographs, put that into a 3-dimensional model that's a virtual model, and we recreated the entire impact area, the debris fill, all the skid marks. And what we found was that the original police investigation, which lasted overnight, and then the recreation team brought in their surveying equipment the next day and started marking pieces of evidence. Well, in that situation, lots of pieces of evidence were missed. For instance, the fluids dried up overnight. And we had photographs of them, but they never made the police investigation. The big piece of evidence that was missing is the railroad took the locomotive and removed it from the state so that the impact condition of the locomotive versus the car at the moment of impact could not be recreated.
Now, tell us a little bit about some of the really egregious, unethical things that Burlington Northern did when they tried to defend this case.
Well, the first one that always comes to mind for me is the electronic evidence of the downloads from the equipment that operates the lights and gates.
Yes.
That it's like a black box, and if that is accurate, it's going to definitively say they were up or down, the lights were on or off.
Where was that black box?
Right at the crossing.
Yeah.
And the Burlington Northern staff went in, downloaded it against protocol without policing, refused to give it to police, refused to give it to us, and we didn't get it until probably 2 years later And in fact, they had produced a printout that turned out to be completely false.
Yeah.
The electronic evidence that would have been the definitive evidence was never produced, despite police requests. When they finally produced evidence, they presented it in a paper format, and then they began an obstructionist regime of motions to prevent us from actually seeing the underlying electronic data. When the court ordered it, they then said the data doesn't exist.
Yeah. I also understand that there was an attempt a phony attempt by the railroad to settle with the families.
That is,
And when they supposedly settled, then all of a sudden they reneged on their settlement because they supposedly discovered new witnesses, as some of you just mentioned, which I understand they bribed people. They gave people $5,000, $10,000 to tell a version of a story that wasn't true, correct?
A $10,000 reward to a witness who acknowledged that his memory of this incident before the $10,000 was totally different than what he then gave in terms of a sworn statement to the railroad, because they helped him remember things the right way.
Yeah, well, congratulations on winning the case and getting the punitive damages award and the sanctions. Right now we're going to bring out Beth Chase, mother of Corey, as well as her lawyer Paul Godlewski.
that's correct.
So let's do that right now. We can hear it directly from her. It's my great privilege to introduce Beth Chase, welcome to the show, and Paul Godlewski. Having lived through all of the legal shenanigans, if you will, that the railroad put you guys through, if you could say one thing to corporate America, or even just a railroad company, about their behavior, what would you say?
I have said, because of, like you say, all that we've been through.
Yeah.
Even though you understand it's a business, where is their sympathy? Would they be doing these things if, God forbid, this had happened to one of their children?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
When you take on a case like this, Paul, it really must resonate deep inside of why you are the lawyer that you are, right?
Well, right from the beginning, yes. Yep. When we got the call from Beth, who actually called another lawyer in our firm, I was asked to take a look at it because I had done some other railroad grade crossing cases. And I remember very early on, I went out to the scene.
Yeah.
And the police markings were still fresh, and when I looked at where they had marked the tires, I really realized that those kids couldn't have gone around the gates. And I think I was the one that told Beth that it just wasn't stacking up the way the news was presenting it and the way the railroad was.
Yeah, that's a shame how they were repeating what the railroad was saying, right?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for taking your time to be here today. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to everybody to know that, just because it's a major corporation doesn't mean they always tell the truth, right? And you got to look at the details.
And we do.
We are fortunate to have one additional family on this program today, Denise Shannon and her lawyer, Alan Shapiro. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for being with us. When you and your lawyer, Alan, pursued this case, it was a nightmare in and itself. You had one nightmare, the passing of your daughter. Then you had Burlington Northern not stepping up to the plate and admitting the truth. As you have experienced this whole ordeal, if you had an opportunity like you have now to tell America's corporations and their CEOs and upper management how they should behave and what their conduct should be, what would you say to them?
You need to be honest. It took us, we already had to live through the heartache, the grief of losing a child. Now we have to live through the heartache, and the grief of digging for the truth. It should have been right out there. We should not have had to have worked as hard as we had to work to get to that truth.
Yeah, there are many kinds of law that you can practice, Alan. This must bring you, in a very fortunate and unfortunate way, a great sense of satisfaction of helping people, right?
Well, it does, especially a case like this where you start out and it's apparent that it's going to be a long haul, that there's going to be a lot of investigation, and we are against a very, very well-funded railroad that it was doing everything in their power to prevent the truth from coming out.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to thank both of you for taking your time to come here. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to our audience. These kinds of verdicts and these kind of cases eventually lead to some sort of change, we would hope, right?
We really believe that, yes, that's true, and that has to happen.
And business isn't going to be as usual, hopefully, right?
Well, that's what we're told. The railroad has at least publicly acknowledged that they're going to change the way they're doing business. I'm not as much of an optimist about that,
Yeah.
but I do know that it has raised the awareness of law enforcement and our courts that what I've been crying for a long time about the abuse of our civil justice system, when it's proven, is an eye-opener.
I want to thank both of you for being on the program. Without you, these families wouldn't have the justice that they got, and thank you for working so hard and being successful.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.